Hey guys, and welcome back to the Compass Games Learn to Play series. Today we welcome developer Rich Hoffman, who's going to give us an overview and go through the first 4 phases of the sequence of play in the first video of our series teaching you how to play The Last Gamble. So sit back and learn all about fighting in the Battle of the Bulge. Over to you, Rich.
Hello gamers. In this Learn to Play video, I'll cover the introduction to the game and go through the rules for the first 4 game phases using one of the smaller scenarios and the TLG Vassal module developed by Kevin Conway and me early in 2024. The Last Gamble, or TLG for short, is more than an update to Hitler's Last Gamble that Danny published in 1989. While some of the elements of the game will be familiar, many new and exciting features have been added, making this an entirely new game that is based on exhaustive historical research and a thorough examination of every aspect of the game. For more detail on our development effort, please see Danny's 2-part video with John Krantz on the TLG Kickstarter page. The Last Gamble is a regimental, battalion-level wargame covering the German Ardennes offensive of 1944-45, otherwise known as the Battle of the Bulge. The major game components include the map, the unit counters and game markers, the player aids and game rules. Also included are a historical study that covers the history of the battle and a game booklet that describes how we built that history into the game. We'll look at the map first. The game map is a detailed terrain analysis of the Ardennes battlefield covering an area 110 miles wide and 80 miles deep. The smaller map is also included to play the battle before the Muse scenario. The map is divided into 2-mile-wide hexagons whose terrain type, characteristics, and hex sides regulate play. These are depicted in a terrain legend in the upper left-hand corner of the map and on the terrain player aid card. The edges of the map also contain entry areas, which are here and here, with the suppressed letters indicating the entry areas, that are often valid supply sources and are used by reinforcements to enter the map during the game. Next, we'll look at some of the unit counters contained in the game, what type of units they represent, some of which are new, and the information contained on each unit counter. The armor units shown above were beautifully depicted in our game by artist Ilya Kurdryashov and show a picture of the predominant vehicle type in each unit's formation, along with the vehicle name and a number corresponding to its armor superiority value. New additions include flak wagons, Sherman jumbo tanks, and flamethrowing tanks for each side. The non-armor units in the game will be familiar to many Bulge gamers, and we use standard NATO symbology. New additions are German Festoon or Fortress Infantry and anti-tank units, and Mountain Infantry that have some movement advantages when using an optional rule. A more detailed description of each unit type is provided in the introduction to the game rules. Each ground unit counter has 2 sides that represent its combat characteristics at full strength on the front and reduced strength on the back. Full strength units that suffer casualties are flipped over from their front to their back side, also known as losing a step in game terms. Reduced strength units that lose a step are eliminated from the game. Armor and infantry units can also be rebuilt or even brought back onto the map after elimination through the use of replacements. More on that later. The air units in the game have expanded greatly. New aircraft types include the Mustang, Spitfire, and Tempest fighters, A-20 and B-25 medium bombers, B-17 and B-24 heavy bombers, Stuka dive bombers, and Arado jet bombers, and even V-1 buzz bombs that, to our knowledge, have never been featured in a Bulge game. They are grouped into several mission types as noted in the lower left corner of each counter. German air units with a red J in the lower right corner are jet-powered and receive special immunity from Allied air operations. Now we'll discuss the information shown on each counter. This is also expanded greatly to minimize the need to constantly refer to the rulebook and play the game using primarily the map, the unit counters, the game markers, and the player aid cards. In the center of the unit counter is the unit image for armored units or the unit symbol for non-armored units. Above that is the unit size that's important for stacking purposes. Above that is the unit name and its German Kampfgruppe or U.S. Task Force designation for those units that received special historical attention. The 3 numbers at the bottom of the counter represent the unit's combat strength, defense strength, and movement allowance. artillery units have red numbers that depict their barrage strength. The colored boxes underlying a unit's defense strength show its zone of control, which can impede enemy movement. The marking beneath the unit's movement allowance shows whether it is motorized if underlined or non-motorized if not underlined, which greatly influences its ability to maneuver across the map. On the right side of the counter, the yellow circled number shows the unit's morale rating, which is a new concept that Danny believes is crucial to the historical accuracy of the game and provides a great deal of fun and anticipation to every battle. The black squared number is the range in hexes that an artillery unit may conduct fire missions. On the left side of the counter, the alphanumeric notation describes the unit's ability to conduct combined arms and its armor class. More on these in the TLG video on combat. The asterisk in the lower left is a reminder that this unit has a historical restriction that affects its setup or entry as a reinforcement. These are described more fully in the scenario notes for each side, the German surprise advantages in Section 10 of the game rules, and the next TLG video on movement. Game markers are used to indicate unit status and map conditions. Each is described in the rules section that it pertains to, so we'll cover them as we go along. The last gamble comes with 58 double-sided charts to aid gameplay, which is why the game box weighs over 8 pounds. The good news is that not all of them are needed for each scenario, and only a few are needed in each game phase. 9 are player aid cards that contain the most frequently used charts and tables that summarize the body of the rules. It's best to keep them in plastic sheet protectors in a 1-inch binder in their sequence of play order. The rest are order of appearance, notes, game status, victory conditions, and temporary rules tables needed for the 5 scenarios in the game. These are best placed beside the game map so that they can be used for updated status of the game as it occurs. The last important piece is the current game errata that will be kept on the Compass Games TLG website. Each TLG scenario follows a timeline measured in days. Each day is divided into 2 TLG game turns, one during daytime or the AM, and one during nighttime or the PM. Each AM and PM game day is further divided into 2 player turns, German first and Allied second. So for each game day, there'll be 2 game turns in which each player conducts 1 player turn on a sequential basis. Germans do their whole game turn, the Allies do their whole game turn. TLG is based on a sequence of play that strictly regulates game activities. The first 3 game phases, weather, supply, and replacement, occur only in the AM game turn. The air phase may occur on AM or PM game turns when one or both players have air missions allocated on that game turn per their order of appearance charts. If no air units have been allocated due to inclement weather, this phase is skipped. The movement phase, combat phase, and engineer phase are always conducted by each player in their respective player turns, with units on the map and those entering the map as reinforcements. The enemy reaction phase and exploitation phase may occur on AM or PM game turns when a player has units on the map that are in reserve to conduct them. The engineer phase completes those activities that take the full game turn or more to accomplish, like building a bridge, building an improved position, or building or clearing a roadblock. Each game phase has a number of game activities listed beneath it on the sequence of play chart. Some must be conducted in order, while others may be conducted at any time during the game phase. Each activity in the sequence of play chart is referenced to its paragraph number in the rules. At the end of each game date, a number of cleanup activities need to take place to advance a unit's current status and set the stage for the next game turn. These are regulated by the game markers chart that determines when game markers are placed and removed, and the game aid table that shows a unit's current status by orienting its unit counter. I'll now use the Battle Before the Muse scenario to demonstrate the game rules in the first 4 phases of the game: the weather phase, supply phase, replacement phase, and air phase. These phases go fairly quickly and set the stage for the more complex movement and combat phases to follow. The weather phase is conducted at the beginning of each daytime game turn. For those players who wish to use the historical weather conditions, simply cross-index the date with the weather and ground conditions will apply to both the daytime and nighttime game turns. For example, the weather for 19 December is fog and the ground conditions are mud. The current weather has a large effect on air operations and their effectiveness. The ground conditions have a large effect on movement and sometimes combat. The current weather and ground conditions should be tracked on the game status card, which we'll show here. For those players who wish a wilder time, use the uncertain weather table that determines weather and ground conditions more randomly, using optional rule 11.1. Next, I'd like to discuss the supply phase. The supply phase occurs on each AM game turn. A unit's supply status remains in effect for that date's daytime and nighttime game turns. A unit's supply status can change in subsequent supply phases based on terrain, the presence of enemy units or their zones of control, the presence of friendly units, or the effects of air resupply, which is Rule 4.4. Next, we're going to trace supply, and I'm going to zoom into the map to show this. In the supply trace, each player determines the supply level, being either general supply, unsupplied, or isolated, for all of their on-map units by tracing a supply line from each unit's current location back to a valid supply source. This is covered in Rule 2.3. The first 4 hexes of a supply line may be traced through clear, rough, wood, or forest hexes, but is blocked by air interdiction, non-road marsh terrain hex sides, non-road severe terrain hex sides, unbridged river or waterway hex sides, or hexes occupied by enemy units or their zones of control. Friendly units negate enemies' ZOCs for supply tracing purposes, and more on that in the TLG movement video. The 5th and subsequent hex of a supply line must contain a highway, road, or trail that runs interrupted by air interdiction, blown bridges, enemy units, or enemy ZOCs back to a valid supply source. Now that I've zoomed in a little bit, I'm going to demonstrate some of the terrain that exists on the map so that you can orient how supply tracing works. The white hexes are clear terrain, and they represent farm fields and very open terrain with little cover and concealment and almost no vegetation. The light mottled hexes are rough terrain, which are relatively rocky and have some trees that are fairly sparse, but not a lot of cover and concealment. The light green hexes are scattered woods that contain trees of moderate size and moderate density and have fairly good cover and concealment. The dark green hexes are forest hexes, which are old growth, heavy treed forests. The roads on the map, the reds are highways, and these offer the fastest movement, especially for motorized units. The yellow roads are hard surface roads that also offer pretty quick movement for everyone. And the black dashed lines here are trails, which are improved but graveled roads, otherwise known as secondary roads in most of the history books, that can turn to mud in very, very wet weather conditions and be easy enough for non-motorized units to negotiate, but really hard for motorized units to do so. The other features on the map are rivers. This is a river that meanders here, and it's crossed by 3 different types of crossings. A heavy bridge is the double hashed marked bridge here. That'll carry any type of unit, from non-motorized soldiers to heavy mechanized tanks. Light bridges are the 2 hashed features, like this one down here, which can carry lighter units but not heavy tanks or heavy artillery. There are a number of fords in the game which occur here, and they are formerly crossings that may have had a bridge that's been blown, but right now they're just shallow sections of the river that can be crossed by determined infantry and light armored units, but nothing else. The last, and very infrequently, you'll find rail bridges, which are not connected to any roads, but they are heavy enough to carry any unit in the game, and they can supply units across them for a relatively short distance. The other major terrain feature that we have in the game, which is new and provides dramatic effects to movement and to combat, is severe terrain, which are the hashed marks indicated here, and they especially occur along rivers. These are extremely steep-sided gullies and river valleys that prevent motorized units from crossing them except at intact bridges or across fords that they are able to cross. Infantry can cross them without a bridge, but can only do so one hex at a time, and that would be the end of their movement. So we'll get more into that in the TLG video on movement, but that is the features of the terrain map that will be necessary to talk about supply. Now I'm just going to look at supply lines for all of these units. That information is provided in the game status card as starting scenario conditions. And in this scenario, all of the units in the game start the game in general supply because this scenario starts at nighttime. We'll assume it's the following daytime game turn, and all of these units are within 4 hexes of a road or on a road, and there are roads that lead back to valid supply sources. There's only one unit that is not in this condition. This unit right here, the 3rd Armored Cavalry, 83rd Cavalry Battalion, or Task Force Hogan. He has the unfortunate situation of being surrounded with German forces to his north, south, and southwest, and their zones of control being exerted to his northeast, southeast, and northwest. If this were the first game date in which he was in this condition, he would be unsupplied, and he would have this marker applied to him that way. If this were the second game date that he were in this condition, he would be isolated, and he'd have this marker applied to him. If he were in his second game date of isolation, and he was still in this situation, he would be subject to surrender, which involves a 2d6 roll, which is based upon his morale, and that's the yellow circled number on the upper right. And if he rolls beneath that, he could surrender. When he surrenders, he is removed from the map and moved off to the side to a location that we'll talk to more in the replacement phase. In each scenario, the German player is going to be subject to German fuel shortages, or Rule 2.6. In our example today, that'll be covered by the special scenario rules for the Battle Before the Meuse scenario that provided the results of the basic German fuel capture rule, or 2.5. This scenario starts on 23 December, and in all of the scenarios that start on the 16th, that 1 die roll for the German fuel capture rule is rolled 1 time on the 18th. So we don't have to worry about that for this scenario, but that rule is covered in Rule 2.5. For those who want more realism, players can choose the optional Allied fuel dumps rule, which is Rule 11.3, where the supply rules and the German fuel shortages are regulated by how much fuel the Allied player is able to maintain and how much the German player is able to capture or destroy. I'll next discuss the replacement phase. When a unit takes a step loss, they flip over to their reduced strength side, as demonstrated here. And when they're eliminated, they are carried off the map onto a holding area. And in this case, we built a holding area on the right called the Division Replacement Depot for division units and the Permanently Dead Pile for other units. If this unit takes another step loss, he'll be eliminated and he'll go to the Division Replacement Depot. If this unit takes a step loss and he's not a division unit, and he's a small unit with only 1 step loss, he's going to be eliminated and end up in the permanently dead pile. This worksheet here is not included in the printed game, but we're going to make it available on the Compass website. Now, the replacement phase reflects the reorganization of combat forces during the battle. It uses scheduled replacement points, or soldiers returning from training, leave, or the hospital, and vehicles returning from depot-level repair shops, and combat replacement points, which are fragments of shattered units, the walking wounded, and vehicles returning after field level repairs to either rebuild reduced strength armor and infantry units back up to full strength, or replace eliminated division level armor and infantry units by bringing them back onto the map. No other units may be rebuilt or replaced. I'm now going to bring up the game status card, which has a function in this. Scheduled replacement points are listed in the game status or victory condition card for each scenario, while combat replacement points are earned through armor and infantry step losses, one combat replacement point for every 3 step losses. And in the Battle Before the Meuse scenario, the scheduled replacement points are shown right here, with the German getting 1 infantry and the US with 1 infantry and 1 armor, and he receives 1 infantry replacement point each AM turn. A player may use 1 replacement point of either type to rebuild or replace a friendly unit, and an individual unit may only receive 1 replacement point per day. So if this unit were to be brought back onto the board, he'd be brought back at reduced strength. And if another unit, which were already reduced on the board, were rebuilt to full strength, it would receive 1 point to do that. Scheduled replacement points may be used on or after the day they are available. Combat replacement points may only be used 2 days after they are earned and are not earned by isolated units or units that surrendered. Now for the nerdy but important bookkeeping part. Replacement points are recorded and expended on the replacement worksheet, which is page 69 of the game rules, and I'll bring it up right here. In the example shown here, the Allied player in the Battle Before the Meuse scenario writes down the number and type of scheduled replacement points from the game status card onto the replacement worksheet before the game starts, and show that the scheduled replacement points for the US player is 1 armor and 1 infantry replacement point scheduled, and they receive 1 infantry replacement point each AM game turn. And those are written down under scheduled replacement points: 1 armor, 1 infantry, 3 infantry. In the game's first turn on 23 p.m., let's assume that the German attacks are wildly successful and the Allied player loses 5 infantry and 3 armor steps, and they'll lose them among these units. This unit is going to lose a step. This one loses a step. This one loses a step. This one is eliminated. This one is eliminated. This one is eliminated. This one loses a step. And it also is eliminated. So what we have is this number of units which were eliminated. We have an infantry regiment that lost a step and was eliminated, another which was lost and eliminated, an infantry battalion which was lost, an armor unit which was stepped and then eliminated, and then another armor battalion which lost a step, and then an artillery unit that lost a step. This was probably an incredibly successful attack. Back to the worksheet. We wrote down these as hash marks in the infantry and the armor columns of the 23 December replacement worksheet. Now that that's done, at the end of the 23 December nighttime game turn, the Allied player is going to do a couple things. First of all, he's going to move the division units that can be replaced from the holding area or division replacement depot to the game status card like this 2 days after they were lost. So all 3 of these units are going to move to the 25 December game turn in the morning, and that's the first time that they can be brought back onto the map as replaced units. The other 2 units were not division units, and they can't be replaced. And artillery units can't never be replaced no matter what they are. The other thing he's going to do is he's going to open his replacement worksheet, and he's going to write down the losses that he took, and he's going to convert 3 of the infantry step losses into one infantry replacement point, and he's going to strike them off on the 23rd and write down the infantry replacement point on the 25th, 2 days after it was lost. Similarly, he's going to take the 3 armor steps he lost on 23 December and convert that to one armor replacement point, which is available on the 25th. In the next replacement phase on 24 AM, the Allied player may use 2 scheduled infantry replacement points and 1 scheduled armor replacement point to rebuild any of his reduced strength infantry or armor units on the map, crossing them off as he uses them on the worksheet. On the 25th, he'll have 1 infantry scheduled replacement point, 1 infantry combat replacement point, and 1 armor combat replacement point to address any losses that he has on the 25th. And it'll keep going from there. And that's how you will use the replacement worksheet. When units are rebuilt, I'll use this unit as an example. If you were to lose a step, use a combat replacement or scheduled replacement point to rebuild him to full strength. When a unit is replaced, he's taken from the game status card, and I'm going to take this unit here, and brought back onto the map through use of a scheduled or combat replacement point, and moved to the map to a city, town, or village hex that is the closest to another unit of his own division and at least 3 hexes away from an enemy unit. In this case, we're going to arbitrarily put this unit here. He's at least 3 hexes away from this enemy unit, and he's closest to any one of these other 3rd Armored Division units. And that's how you bring them back onto the map. And that's the end of the replacement phase and the activities that take place in it. I'll next discuss the air phase, where things get a little bit more interesting. Each air unit represents 40 to 80 aircraft sorties over the Ardennes battlefield. The air phase, Rule 4.0, describes how air power is used both tactically and operationally in the game through the execution of air missions and 1 artillery mission that are executed in the following sequence. Bridge interdiction fire is the first event in the air phase where the Allied player may use deployed artillery units to destroy or impede enemy movement over a bridge that was built by the German player. In this example, we're going to assume that the German built a bridge at hex 2713, and the deployed U.S. artillery unit 7th Corps 188, which is here, wants to deny it to the Germans. To conduct bridge interdiction fire, the unit conducts the fire mission and takes the bridge interdiction counter and places it over the bridge that he wants to interdict. Note this hex has more than 1 bridge, but this is the one that he wanted to interdict. And then he rolls a die roll on the bridge tables for bridge interdiction fire, and these are the values that can be received. 1 or 2 will destroy the bridge, 3 or 6 will leave the bridge intact, but it'll be interdicted. In this case, we're going to assume it was a 3, and the bridge is now interdicted, but it's still intact. Any German unit that wants to cross that bridge is going to pay half of their movement allowance to cross it. If the bridge had been destroyed, it would have to be rebuilt. And that's it for bridge interdiction fire. Okay, the second event in the air phase is air unit allocation, where players move air units that are available on that game turn from their order of appearance cards into play. So I'm going to bring up the scenario order of appearance card for the Allies. And we're going to assume it's the 24th of December. And we're going to bring these units onto the air allocation box. This box we developed while we were developing the Vassal module. It's not in the printed game, but we're going to make it available on the Compass website. We also go to the German order of battle for the same day, 24 December. The first air missions are always V1 attacks on either the city of Liege or Viviers. In the battle before the Meuse scenario, they're always on the city of Liege every day. These represent barrages of V1 buzz bombs that occurred about every 15 minutes that destroyed buildings, damaged roads, and put a wrench into Allied planning. V1 attacks impede Allied movement in and around the target hexes and can even destroy Allied fuel dumps if they're lucky. In our V1 example, the German player makes 3 die rolls to determine which city is attacked, and we know it's going to be Liege, so we'll send it over here. The second one is the target hex, which is hex 2602 in our case. The third roll is target accuracy, and it's going to be scattered. And the fourth die roll, if necessary, is going to determine the direction of the scatter, and it's going to scatter to the south. Now, the units which are in the hex are going to have to spend 2 movement points to move out of it. They're going to be reduced in their attack strength and their defense strength by half, and no other units can move into that hex with the V1s dropping in it throughout the day. And that's the end of the V1 attacks. We're going to go back to this section down here. The second air missions available are non-battlefield interception, where the Allied player may choose to intercept German air units from entering the map. One Allied fighter or fighter bomber can intercept 2 German fighter bombers, but German jet units may not be intercepted. This choice carries some risk for the Allied player that adds both uncertainty and fun to the game. In our example, the Allied player uses 1 P-47 unit to intercept 2 German fighter bombers. That one and that one, leaving 1 German fighter bomber and 1 jet light bomber free over the battlefield. And that's it for battlefield interception. The third air missions are air resupply missions, where each side, when they're available, can attempt to assist units that were isolated during the battle. Successful air resupply for either side changes the supply status of the affected units from isolated to unsupplied for 24 hours. Failure leaves them in their current supply status. On daytime game turns, when the C-47 transport unit is available, that's this one, the U.S. player may attempt to resupply all U.S. units in and adjacent to the air resupply target hex using a random die roll. In this particular case, we're going to assume that this unit is isolated. The German player may negate this resupply attempt by intercepting the C-47 transport unless the U.S. player provides an available fighter bomber as an escort. So in this case, the Allied player is going to move the C-47 into the hex with the isolated unit, and he's also going to use a fighter bomber to escort it. This will keep the German fighter bomber, which is still available, from intercepting the transports and shooting them down, because transport planes were pretty important. So now that the air resupply unit is in place and it's escorted, the Allied player is going to roll a die and determine whether or not the resupply was successful. In this particular case, he rolled a tough luck 6, and it's dumped all the supplies into the Uthra River, which is down here, and left task force or isolated. At the end of a resupply mission, we're going to delete the 2 air units because they were no longer successful. If the air resupply mission had been successful, we'd have left the C-47 there. On nighttime game turns, when the Ju-88 light bomber and transport is available, the German player may attempt to resupply all German units occupying the air resupply target hex using a random die roll and the same procedure. The difference between Allied and German resupply is that Allied resupply is good in the target hex and all hexes that are around it, and the German resupply is only good in the target hex. The fourth air missions are air interdiction missions, where the Allied player may use available medium bomber, heavy bomber, and super heavy bomber air units to interdict hexes that contain German-controlled cities, towns, castles, or villages, or that are located at river crossings or the intersection of roads and/or highways. Only one air interdiction mission may be flown against a single hex each turn, and it must maintain a minimum safe distance away from friendly units. 3 hexes for medium bombers and 6 hexes for heavy bombers and super heavy bombers. Air interdiction may not be negated by German air units and is executed through a random die roll on the right side of the air attack air interdiction table using the cumulative modifiers listed below it. The effects of the air interdiction are listed at the bottom of the chart. So in our example, the 9th Bomber Command, B-26, chooses to bomb the village of Bande, which is hex 2322, which is here. We're just going to move him to there. This hex has the added bonus of being occupied by the German 5th Panzer Army 600 Pioneer or Engineer unit, which is a very high-value target. This also gains an air attack onto the German Pioneer in the bargain. Now I'm going to bring up the air interdiction attack table. The cumulative modifiers on the air interdiction table are -2 for B-26 interdiction and -1 for a motorized non-flak or anti-aircraft unit in the target hex. The B-26 is going to roll a 5, and that adjusts down to a 2 on the table. Here's the air interdiction column. He rolls a 5. It's going to adjust down to a 2. And we find that the result is an interdicted one-turn result against the hex. And since he's in a village, a disruption effect against the German unit. We note that by placing an interdicted marker in the hex, and this can be more than one turn, it can be up to 5, and the German unit is disrupted by air attack. So that's what it looks like after the air interdiction attack. So that's in it for air interdiction. The 5th and last air missions in the air phase are air attacks, where both players may use available fighter bomber and light bomber units to attack enemy units on the map that are not in forest hexes or adjacent to friendly units. There's only one air attack allowed per hex, and the German player places all of his air attacks first, followed by the Allied player. Each player may then use remaining available fighter bombers or fighters one at a time to negate enemy air attacks on a one-for-one basis. German jet units may not be negated. Those air units that have not been negated then conduct their air attacks through a random die roll on the left side of the air attack air interdiction table. The die roll is modified by the cumulative modifiers listed below the table, and the results are listed at the bottom of the chart. So, as we look at the map here, we see that there's a whole lot of units which are adjacent to each other. We see some units that are not and are eligible to be attacked, but many of them are in forest hexes and they can't be attacked. So, in our example, the German player has one fighter bomber and one light bomber, who's a jet, available for these, and he chooses to attack one Allied unit in Bravo, which is hex 2614. He's going to save the fighter bomber to negate the most dangerous Allied air attack which takes place. So I'm going to move this unit to there. The Allied player is going to use one British and two US fighter bombers to attack the head of the German central column, which is down here in the villages Hargemon and Harsen and Grun, respectively. Now that all the attacks have been designated, negation can occur, and the German player chooses to take the FW-190 that he still has available and negate the air attack on his strongest armor unit at the head of the column. So both of these units are now removed, and this armored unit is not subject to air attack. The other two units are, and I'm just going to describe the German attack and one of the Allied attacks. Okay, Bravo is occupied by the 142 artillery unit that is in strategic movement. Its cumulative die roll modifiers on the air attack table on the left side are -2 because we have a unit in strategic movement, and -1 for a motorized, non-flak, non-anti-aircraft artillery unit. These add up to a -3, and the German jet bomber rolls a 6, which adjusts down to a 3. So if he rolls a 6 and it's a village and adjusts down to a 3, we see that it's a disruption effect and the artillery is disrupted. The air unit goes away. The unit's strategic movement marker is removed and the unit is disrupted. One of the results of this attack is now that this unit is disrupted, he's not going to be able to move. And since he's a motorized unit, he's going to prevent other motorized movement from occurring in that particular hex. Now I'm going to take the attack against Harsen, which is this one. And Harsen is occupied by the Mark IV Panzer Battalion of the 2nd Panzer Division and the 47th Panzer Corps headquarters. Its cumulative die roll modifier is -1 for a motorized non-flak units in the target hex. And the P-38 rolls a 2, which is adjusted down to a 1 on the village column. And it's also a disruption effect, which disrupts these 2 units. This unit is deleted. That unit is disrupted. That unit is disrupted. And that's what we have left. And that's it for air attacks. We won't adjust or adjudicate the last one because it'll be along the same vein as the first 2. Finally, the last part of the air phase is the implementation of Allied air supremacy that imposes a mandatory condition on the German player during clear weather daytime game turns. Its effects include denying all German strategic movement, reducing the movement allowance of all German motorized units by 2 movement points and all German headquarters by half, reducing the effectiveness of German flak units conducting anti-armor defense, and reducing the morale rating of all German units by 1 point. For example, this German unit with a movement allowance of 9 will be reduced by 2 movement points. And this German unit, which is a 5th Panzer Army headquarters unit, his movement allowance is going to change from 8 to 4. The other thing it'll do is reduce the effectiveness of German flak units that are conducting anti-armor defense, and it'll reduce the morale rating of all German units by 1 point. The morale rating is the yellow circle on each unit. In this case, it's going to become worse and go from a 4 to a 5. In the Battle Before the Meuse scenario, Allied air supremacy is in effect every AM game turn. And air supremacy is one of the most powerful effects in the game, despite its lack of sexiness or cachet. Well, gamers, that's it for this TLG Learn to Play video. The next video will cover the movement and enemy reaction phases. The third will cover the combat, exploitation, and engineer phases, as well as the German surprise advantages that apply in the early days of the Wacht am Rhein, Last Blitzkrieg, and Das Eisenschmieden scenarios. A possible fourth video will cover the optional rules and the 24 game variants that expand the variety, complexity, and possible outcomes of the game. That's it for me. Happy gaming, and we'll see you on the other side.